Well, welcome back, friends. Joining us today for another Testimony Tuesday is Cara Davis, also known as Cara D. I'm Jasmine Wilson, and as you know, we are in January, so we are talking about relationships. Cara and I met at a women's event maybe a year or two ago, and we've kind of just been in touch since then. Cara also is a co-host on a podcast, and so I automatically just immediately felt like I knew her after listening to all the podcasts because, people just tell all their business on podcasts. She's a few years older than me, and so I really felt like I had this connection with her, and, listening to the podcast and seeing where she is and seeing where I want to be was really just like she's really been someone that I look up to and someone that inspires me. And so, Cara, thank you so much for chatting with me today. I'm really excited for everything that we're going to get to discuss.
Absolutely. I'm really excited. I was so honored that you even thought of me when you texted me.
Of course.
So thank you.
Of course. What would you say is your most influential relationship in this season of life?
You jumped right on in, didn't you? Most influential relationship right now in this season, I would have to say, as cliche as it is the one with my fiance.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have, in our year of engagement, we have really, there have been so many spurts of growth in different areas of our relationship. And in the beginning, when we first got engaged, of course, there's the whole, oh my God, I'm just so excited. And then you go from that to being okay, what does this look like?
Right.
What does marriage mean? What I'm literally going to have to be in a house with you all the time and I can't leave. And so you go through almost like a grieving period. And I don't want to sound negative, because it's not a negative grieving, but you just grieve what your life used to be like without them.
Mm-hmm.
On a from a woman who has never been married before, I've lived on my own by myself. It's just a huge transition to wrap your mind around, to be I'm never going to be able to live alone again.
Yeah.
So that was a weird kind of, not sad, but just an awakening period. And then we started premarital therapy. Mm-hmm. And that was a huge transition, because we brought up all of the issues we had ever had, which is hard, right? Because, you go to therapy and sometimes it feels good. And sometimes you leave therapy and you feel like you just got into a fist fight, because you're literally hammering out, remember that time you said blah, 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 and that really hurt me. And that was 5 years ago. And you're bringing up all these old emotions, but it's stuff that has to be worked out, because otherwise you'll really be continuing to argue about things and not knowing what their source is. So it's necessary. I recommend premarital therapy and premarital counseling to anybody thinking about getting married. And then we went to premarital counseling at my church, and it was more about less about dealing with our issues per se, and more about getting to know each other on a very, very intimate level outside of sex. So once we started our premarital counseling at church, we decided that we were going to be celibate. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the most important decisions we made. I'm trying to get better with that. One of the most important decisions we made together, because during that period of time, that was a hard process too. So Ben and I are complete and total opposites when it comes to personality. We were the example of the class, and they were see, these people this usually don't ever work. And I was oh my God, we're not going to work. This is, so it just ended up being a source of anxiety for me. Mm-hmm. And then I had to kind of let go of those, I guess, those intangibles, and start thinking about the tangible things that we have, or the intangibles that we already connect on, even though we're complete and polar opposite. And so I just learned so much about him and how to be intimate with him without having sex, which is a huge deal for a relationship, especially going into marriage, because there will be times where he travels for work, internationally. Mm-hmm. And so I'll go, a couple weeks without seeing him. If we had not gone through this like celibacy period, like, and we had just continued to have sex, I legitimately, I think, would not have been able to handle being away from him without that like physical component. And so it forced us to learn how to be intimate with each other without that. And I think it's like saved our relationship. The reason why this relationship is so important in this season in my life is because I am preparing myself to be a wife and to be a godly wife and to honor my husband as the head of our household and then him honor God as the head of everything. And so it has been a spiritual experience for me. And I've learned how to pray more strategically. We pray together. I pray separately. It has definitely like grown me as a woman, as it relates to my pettiness and my ability to pick my battles, which is huge. I think not just in a romantic relationship, but I think in family relationships, just in general. I haven't learned how to do that with my mom as well yet, but you got to start somewhere. So
I recently read the blog on the podcast website about submission and what that looks like to millennials. And so I'm not dating, I'm not in a relationship. And so I don't really have to, I mean, obviously you have to submit at work and to your parents and things like that. But I'm not in that male-female relationship submission role. I've never really experienced that. And so in my mind, when I see submission, I just see like you said, you know, the male is the head of the household and then God is the head of the male. And then that's how decisions are made. That's how things transpire. But I thought it was interesting because in the podcast or on the blog, they talked about how sometimes the woman makes decisions, sometimes the male makes decisions, but they're both led by God. Can you talk about what that looks like in your, because you guys live together right now, correct?
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
So what does that look like in your relationship with you having that role in terms of, you know, wanting your relationship to be God-centered?
Okay, so I think something worth mentioning in the beginning that I think submission means one thing in the Bible, and it has been like extrapolated to mean something completely different in the world. And I think that the article or the blog post on the podcast website, it was written by my line sister and like my matron of honor, Marcy Vandiver, and her husband, Kevin Vandiver. He's a pastor in New York. And I think that carving out submission and what it means for your relationship is super important, because I feel like some people take it to the extreme where it's like whatever the man says goes. You don't have, as the woman, any input. And that's really just not true. Submission is where I believe and honor God enough to know that I chose the man who is going to listen to God, and he's also going to listen to my input. So that if there's ever a situation where, let's say, I don't know, this is kind of trivial, but let's say like I like one house and he likes another house. And we're like, which house are we going to pick? At the end of the day, I give my input. He listens to me. He values my input. But let's say, I mean, he's a little bit more rational than I am. So sometimes I'm like, I want this house because it's cute, but not because, you know, it's what we need as a family. He will listen to what I have to say. He will take it to heart. He will pray about it. And then he will end up making the last decision. It does not mean I have no input. And it also doesn't mean that that's the scenario every single time. There are plenty of times. I mean, way more times now that we've made a decision and he has taken what I said and that's the decision. So it just really depends on the dynamic of your relationship, and to ensure that both parties are acting under God's providence. Because if I'm asking God what I should be doing or what we should be doing, and you're also asking God what we should be doing, we should be able to come together and say, okay, this is what God is telling us.
Right.
And this is how we need to move forward as a unit. And like, sometimes I don't hear God as clearly. Actually, that's a new development for me, like actually listening and hearing God. And it's never like a, hey girl, you don't need to do that. You know, which before I like kind of started really listening, I thought that what it was it, you know, I thought he would be whispering like, girl, what you got going? You know, like, You shouldn't be doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's little things that happen and you're like, that would have never happened otherwise. Like, you just have to have discernment. There's not a ton of times where he's like, you doing this. And I'm like, okay. Like, that's just not the relationship we have. And I think it's not even necessarily millennials. It's really, it should be everybody. Like, the patriarchal society, to me, just doesn't exist anymore. Like, it's just unrealistic to think that a woman who probably is smarter than every man that she's encountered cannot have a say so in whatever the decisions are of a household. It just doesn't make sense. Like, I feel like just a patriarchal society, just like from a marital standpoint, and even like as single women, like at work, if there's a man boss or like your superior is a man or whatever, he would be doing himself a disservice if he did not allow your input, because women bring so much to the table outside of just the fact that we're cute. Like, we're cute and we're like really smart. So it's like, you should be listening to women. And so that's why, like, you know, the whole like submission conversation gets a bad rap. It's because of men thinking in a patriarchal way. And it's like, that's not really what God meant. And it's not what people should be practicing in a marriage. A marriage should be a partnership. Yeah. Like, it should be 100. Like, it's not even 50-50. It's like both people are giving 100%, so that nobody ever feels slighted. And of course, there will be times where, you know, like, I can only give 10. But in an ideal world, both parties should be giving their all. And if they are, and you're both listening to God, the decisions are going to be made together conducive to whatever God is telling you, and then it's fine.
Something you touched on made me think about like the importance of knowing your role in a relationship. And so whether it be a spouse, significant other, or just like a sister, a sibling, or a friend, you know, like you have to know who you are before you can then develop those roles in those relationships. And so can you talk a little bit about what that transition was like for you in terms of developing that role within your current relationship with your fiance?
I brought that, like, oldest child, like, you're gonna do what I want to do and you're gonna do what I say when I say it, or like, that's it, I'm gonna go off. And that wasn't my role, because Ben is not my child, nor is he a subordinate of mine. We are on the same, you know, we're equal. So I had to learn quickly, because when we first started dating, I was Ben's first love. So of course he did everything I wanted to do. Right. And so I was used to that Ben. But then when we got back together in 2016, I got another Ben, which was the grown man Ben, which was the no Ben. And so I had to quit. I mean, we had tons of arguments about like, why you ain't doing what I want you to do? This is stupid. Why you ain't doing? I asked you, and he's like, because I don't want to do it. Like, and there's no other explanation. And I would be like, what you mean you don't want to do it? He's like, I said what I said. And we got a ton. I mean, we had a ton of arguments about that. And so I had to really quickly like reevaluate what Ben needed from me in the relationship, which isn't, you need to do this. It's, hey, have you thought about this? Because it's the same exact thing. I'm basically accomplishing the exact same thing, right? Except I'm changing the way that I'm doing it. Hey, have you thought about this? What about this opportunity? Did you see this? I saw this. Have you thought about that? And just making men think it's their idea is the best, because you can accomplish the exact same goal without being, you know, a biatch, or without just seeming to throw a temper tantrum. And so that, I think my role in Ben's life is to be the person that like is the catalyst to push him, but in a different way, because he's not going to respond to that. My role is to prompt you to think about the stuff I would normally try to force you to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I realized that that's my role especially in my my upcoming marriage, is to make him think about stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And his role for me is to calm me down when I'm like, because I'm actually normally, I used to be terrible. My attitude and my just demeanor was not welcoming. Like the fact that you felt like you could come and talk to me and like get my number and like be friends with me was not a thing. Like I was just a very like, I don't know what the word is, but I just wasn't approachable, which is terrible to even think about because it makes me sad that I missed out on so many potential great friendships because of being, I mean, I do have great friends, don't get me wrong, but like I was just not a good person in college. And around that time, I was still trying to figure out who I was. And so I think another role for me, not only for the podcast, but like just in social settings, is to be approachable and open and like talk to the person who looks like they're, you know, not having a good time or looking like, you know, they don't know anybody. Like I went to a New Year's Eve party and there was a girl who it was a ton of couples and she was the only person there that was single. And so I ended up just being like, hey girl, where are you from? Like blah, blah, blah. And, you know, ended up finding out like she went to school in Baton Rouge and she knew people that I knew from law school. So like, you know, I try to be that person and serve that role now in friendships or in like social settings because I think it's super important. And that's also super important in your current relationships. To be the person that exposes them to new things or exposes them to parts of the friendship that they didn't really know were possible. And so I think that that's the role I've twisted what I thought my role should be into something that's more productive. And I think it's something that really just comes with growth and like maturity. I mean, I'm 31. At 25, I would not be having this conversation in the same way. And I mean, that's just the truth of the matter. What was I doing at 25? Yeah, I wouldn't have, nah. Not even close. Yeah. I think church people force people to get married because they think it's what's best for somebody else, but it might not be. I mean, it just might not be. Somebody may not be able to give up that much of themselves for another person because you're literally changing who you are.
Right. But even bigger than that, I think that not everyone was made for me. You know, like they have these big sayings that like, you know, everyone has a soulmate and all these things. And not every, so when I think of marriage, I think of, I have my purpose, you have your purpose, and we have our purpose together. And so when we come together as a couple, we're able to do more, faster, better, stronger. But
right.
Everyone's purpose doesn't necessarily coincide with someone else. My purpose on this earth may just be to have my purpose and my purpose alone and serve that purpose. I may not need a spouse or a significant other or, you know, a husband to fulfill the purpose that God has given me.
Right.
And people don't, like you said, people don't always consider that as an option that, you know, especially church people, they're like, you know, you get a job, you graduate, you get married, have kids, and that's it. Like no one says, you know, there are other options outside of developing those relationships.
Right. And I think to be honest and to be frank, I think the biggest thing with that and why that's a thing is because of sex. They don't feel like church people don't understand that some people can go without sex and be okay. And I think that that's something that like the church doesn't really want to talk about, right? Like celibacy in continuity. Like some people just, that's okay for them. And like their relationship with God is enough to be able to fulfill that. And I think that that's something that church people don't want to talk about because it's awkward. And then also, I mean, it's I don't want to say it's unrealistic, but it's something that not a lot of people have been able to do. So it's just rare. And like the people that are up here teaching it haven't been able to do it. So it's like, how can they, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I do think that needs to be a component that churches talk about is how to be single and like serve your purpose to God by yourself.
Yeah.
Like, this is not in anticipation of anything else. It's in anticipation of like when Jesus comes back. Like that, you know what I'm saying? I think that that's a very valid point. Yeah.
Hearing you talk about that not reminded you, but so I know you said that your fiance is your most vital or important relationship that you have right now. What would you say were some of the components of the relationships around that relationship that kind of helped you get to where you are and continuing to move forward with your role in that?
I think there are 4 vital relationships. Now, this is outside of my relationship with God, but there are like 4 vital relationships that I think have molded me into being the like wife to be. So the first is so I was talking about my last sister who wrote that article. Her name is Marcy. She has been instrumental in being like a sounding board for me and my like ridiculous ideas and thoughts on things, and kind of telling me that they were stupid in a way that wasn't mean or that was just productive. Or telling me maybe you should think about it this way. We just have like, she has really been a sounding board for me. And like, just, I really value her advice because I know it comes from a godly place. And so she is like a biblical scholar, and that like she studies the word to like figure out what God really meant. Because she doesn't believe that the way that the Bible has been interpreted is really what God intended. And so that is something that I don't think about. And so she brings that perspective in to be like, well, God really wasn't thinking, like, even from the submission standpoint, like God wasn't really thinking that women were going to be like cowering in the corner. God knew that women are powerful beings, and which is why he created us. And so like, that's kind of her mindset. So anyway, she has been like super influential. And I watch her and her husband and just like the things that they do, and just like their relationship, and like how they show each other love. And it's super inspiring to me. So she's been one. The other one is my mom, which is super cliche, but my mom was married to my dad. Their relationship ended, and then she was single for about 20 years. Yeah, so 20 years single, not married. She dated people, but she wasn't remarried. And her relationships and the way that she handled things, I learned from in a I'm never going to do that way, and also in a I like the way that she forgives. Her flaws in relationships have taught me so much about the things that I don't want to bring into my marriage. And not in like a negative way, but in a like, I don't want to bring those, and I don't want you to continue to do those things, so I'm going to bring those up to you. We can have a dialogue, because my mom is young. My mom's only 47. We can have a dialogue where I can be like, I don't think you should be doing this. And she could be like, well, I'm doing it. And I can be like, but this is why you shouldn't do it. And so that dialogue, and like me watching her, and like her failing in relationships or succeeding in relationships, has really taught me a ton. There are some certain arguments where she's gotten into arguments, something's happened, and I'll be like, what would I do in that situation? And I'll like talk to Ben about it, and like we'll like basically go over what we would do. And that has just been like such a huge learning experience. Plus my mom is just, she wants the best for me, and she still treats me like a child sometimes. So she gives me advice that I may not use, but that is helpful. So I think that just us as a unit, she has just brought so much to my life, and without knowing that she is teaching me. And then the third is my little sister. So Courtney is like my bestie. Like, she's the homie for real. She's crazy, but but the reason why she's been so influential is because she's so young, and her perspective is like generally super innocent and like doesn't take a lot of it takes out a lot of the grown person decision making and really just is based off like how you feel. And sometimes we as adults, like, we forget that, like, let's just make a decision based on like it feels good or not. Sometimes that's not realistic, you know, and you have to be rational and be like, this may feel good, but it costs $3,000, so it's dumb.
Yeah.
But she like helps me remember that. So she just has taught me to be like super free and like carefree and just like, you know, essentially when something no longer serves you in whatever capacity you want it to serve you, then letting it go.
Yeah.
And that's hard for me. In a good way, sometimes is able to just like cut off the fat in her life of things and people that just don't serve her. And that's, to me, like super, super invaluable as it relates to, I mean, jobs, freaking friendships, relationships, whatever. It's super important. And then the last one I would say is my granddad. My grandfather passed away in 2013, but he raised me. My grandparents raised me. So he was the father figure that I grew up with. And he was super influential as it relates to what I thought a man should be and like treat a woman like. Because no matter what, and so it was me, my sister, and like my cousins. We all lived in the same house. So it was 6 kids. And my granddad, every little holiday, Valentine's Day, he gets us candy, leaves it on the bed with a card. Easter, gets us a basket, leaves it on the bed with a card. Blah, blah, blah. Like, same thing. And so even though he was a man of few words, and like, you know, he wasn't the typical like, oh my God, I love my grandkids so much. He taught us that like thoughtfulness is important. It doesn't matter if it's like the little 99-cent heart that has 3 little nasty candies in it from Walmart. It's the fact that you thought about me enough to go to Walmart, buy that, get a card, you know. Yeah, it was just every holiday thing. And so it just, to me, like, just showed me that like I need to expect that from a man, period. Like, and it doesn't have to be like an extravagant gift. And like, because gifts are not my love language. I like them, but it's not like, if I never had to get a gift again, but you would like tell me how beautiful I am every day, girl, I'll be like, this is it. But it still lets me know that it's super important to show people that you care in doing those little things. So he has been one of the most influential relationships I've ever had. And when he passed away, I was devastated. But yeah, I have a ton of people and those aren't the only people that have really like molded me into the individual I am today, because I was horrible. I just wasn't a good person. And I didn't know I wasn't a good person until I was a good person. And I was like, whoa, I was terrible. And so, yeah, anyway, one more person that I didn't think about. Ben's mom. I mean, this woman is like life, okay? So she has been the biggest supporter of me from day one. Like, so big, like knows everything I've got going, calls me separately, checks in on me, all kind of stuff. Like, it's just, and I talk to her about like my family stuff, because I have a lot of family drama. I'm trying to not have it, but I've had a lot of family drama, I'll say. And she's just like she gives the most godly, objective, rational response. And I may not want to hear it at the time, because I'll be like, I don't want to do that because I'm sick of it. And she'll be like, well, when you're ready to do it, this is the decision you need to make. And she has been so influential in like the way that I've maneuvered my family relationships recently. And so she's just been, oh my God, she's such a godsend. She is so amazing. So yeah, my future mother-in-law is on the list also. I do want to add, just as like a side note, it is super important to not settle in dating. And people dating, like women dating in their late 20s, early 30s, you feel as if you have to give up some stuff, like give up some standards that you have. Like, I'll probably get flack for this, but like some people are like, I, at this point, can't, like, I have to give up my want to date somebody without kids. And you don't have to. Like, if you don't want to date somebody with kids, don't date somebody with kids. Like, make that a known priority for you. And if you pray for that, and if that's what God wants you to have, he will make it happen for you. But don't ever settle just off the strength of you being like, oh, I'm getting older and I need to, like, no. I think that women, I just keep hearing this all the time where women are being forced, why you ain't getting married? Why you ain't doing this? And it's like, let them find the person that they want to be with. And maybe they don't want to be with anybody, but let them make that decision and don't feel pressured to give up on your standards that are reasonable to be with somebody. But that's all I have to say.
Listening to the podcast, you shared a lot of like transparent information about like your previous dating history and even your friendships. And I think that it's so important for women to see that they're not the only ones that are struggling. Like, they're not the only ones that are sinning, or they're not the only ones that are, like having these issues with settling or being pressured to date. I remember a lot of times you talked about, like, before you guys got engaged, you would talk about the desire to get married and to get engaged, and how you would, compare yourself to people that are on Instagram and things like that. And so I just wanted to commend you for that, because it's honorable that you still have those people that are like, I'm struggling, but I know I'm not the only one that's struggling. And I know that there are people that need to hear my struggle so that they, don't feel like they're alone. And so thank you for your transparency, and thank you for just, always being honest and being true to yourself, regardless of what that platform looks like for you.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. I really appreciate it. That's just who I am. I mean, I can't not tell all my business. I really can't. I have to share. I just have to. It's like in my DNA. So thank you for having me. This has been really awesome on this Saturday morning.
Of course. Well, you guys should definitely subscribe to Millennial Love Podcast. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you'll join us next week. And until next time, don't forget to keep on
going with him.